The first thing you need to understand about living up here on Black Bear Ridge is the silence. It's not a peaceful silence. It's a heavy, crushing thing. It presses down on you, gets inside your bones, and reminds you of every mistake you've ever made, every ghost you've tried to outrun. For 15 years, this silence has been my only real companion. My name is Silas, and I am what people down in the valley call a mountain man. It's their polite way of calling me a hermit, a runaway. They're not wrong. I ran up here to escape a past that burned hotter than any forest fire. I built this cabin with my own 2 hands, learned to hunt and trap, and let the world forget I ever existed. But loneliness is a cancer. It eats you from the inside out, slowly, until you're just a hollow shell. And one day the hollow gets so big, you'll do anything to fill it. That's what brought me down to the settlement. It wasn't a town, not really, more like a festering wound on the side of the highway. A collection of trailers and makeshift buildings where desperate people did desperate things. I only ever went for supplies, trading pelts for salt, coffee, and cartridges. But this time was different. Tucked behind the usual trading post was a gathering. A rough-looking crowd, men with dead eyes and cheap whiskey on their breath. And in the center of them, there was her. She was a ghost already, wrapped in a threadbare wool blanket that served as a hood and a shroud. You couldn't see her face, just the dirt-caked tips of her bare feet. A man with a greasy beard and a missing front tooth was holding a rusty chain attached to a cuff on her wrist. He was auctioning her off. Not for money, really, for anything. A working truck battery, a case of beer, a handful of shotgun shells. It was a barter of human misery. My first instinct was to turn away. It was none of my business. The mountain taught me to mind my own, to not get involved. But I couldn't move. There was a stillness about her, a defiance in the way she stood, even in chains. The men jeered and poked, but she didn't flinch. It was like she wasn't even there. The silence she carried was different from mine. It was a shield. Mine was a prison. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the whiskey I'd had, or maybe it was just the crushing weight of 15 years of solitude. I thought about the hollow space in my cabin, in my chest. I walked forward. The crowd parted, more out of surprise than respect. They all knew me, the crazy man from the ridge. "What do you want for her?" I asked. My voice was a rusty gate hinge. The greasy man grinned. Well, Silas, come down to join the living. She ain't much, hasn't said a word, but she can work." I reached into the worn leather pouch on my belt. I pulled out everything I had left from my last trade. 3 crumpled, faded dollar bills. It was nothing. It was everything. $3, I said. He scoffed. $3. I can get more than that for the chain. I held his gaze. My eyes, I've been told, are unsettling. They've seen things that make other men look away. "The chain comes with her," I said, my voice low and flat. $3. Or you can explain to your friends why you're suddenly having trouble breathing. It was a bluff. Mostly. But the mountain gives a man a certain reputation. He looked at me, then at the woman, then at the pathetic bills in my hand. He snatched them, unlocked the cuff, and shoved the chain into my hand. "She's your problem now," he spat. And just like that, I owned a person. The thought was so grotesque, it almost made me sick. I hadn't bought a servant. I had bought a shadow. I'm glad you're here to listen. This is where my world, the one I had so carefully built to keep the past out, began to crumble. Follow my story, until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this strange tale has reached. The walk back up the mountain was silent. I walked ahead, the chain feeling heavy and wrong in my hand, though I never used it. She followed a few paces behind, her bare feet surprisingly sure on the rocky trail. She never stumbled. She never made a sound. When we reached the cabin, I gestured toward the door. "This is it," I said. She paused on the threshold, her hooded head tilting as if she were listening to the silence of the place, judging it. Then she stepped inside. I didn't know what to do. I was a man who hadn't shared his space with another soul in a decade and a half. I pointed to a small cot in the corner, a place I usually threw my pelts. "You sleep there. There's a pump for water out back. The outhouse is beyond the woodpile. You'll earn your keep. There are chores." She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was it. No words. No fear. Nothing. I didn't even know what to call her. I started calling her Shadow in my own mind. It fit. She moved through my home like a silent dark shape at the edge of my vision. The first few days were a tense dance of avoidance. I'd wake before dawn to find she was already up, the fire rekindled, a pot of water heating over the flames. She'd mend my clothes with a skill that surprised me, the stitches fine and even. She cleaned the cabin, swept the floors, and organized my cluttered shelves with a quiet efficiency that was both helpful and deeply unnerving. She never ate with me. I'd leave a plate of food on the table, and when I wasn't looking, it would disappear. She moved like a forest creature, wary and silent. The most unsettling part was her eyes. I could never see them, hidden as they were in the perpetual darkness of her hood, but I could feel them. When I'd be skinning a rabbit or oiling my rifle, I'd get a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I'd look up, and her hooded form would be perfectly still watching me. It wasn't a hostile gaze. It was analytical, like she was taking me apart piece by piece, studying the gears and levers that made me tick. My loneliness had been a dull, constant ache. Her presence transformed it into something sharp and acute. The silence in the cabin was no longer empty. It was filled with her, with the questions I was too afraid to ask. Who was she? Where did she come from? What horrors had she seen that stole her voice? And the biggest question of all, the one that haunted my sleep, what had I done? I hadn't saved her. I had just moved her from one cage to another, a prettier one with a better view, but a cage nonetheless. And some nights, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, certain that the person locked in here with me wasn't her, but me. The mountain winter arrived with a vengeance, burying the ridge in a thick blanket of snow. The world shrank to the four walls of my cabin. Before I'd welcomed the isolation of winter. It was an excuse to hole up, to not see another human for months. But now, that isolation was shared, and it was 1,000 times more intense. The silence between us became a living thing, breathing in the cold air, crackling with the fire. It was during this deep freeze that the first cracks in her wall of silence appeared. Not with words, but with actions. I had a small withered geranium on my windowsill. It was a relic from another life, a plant someone I once knew had given me. I don't know why I kept it. It had been half dead for years. One morning, I noticed she'd moved it to catch the thin winter sun. She'd been using her ration of water to moisten its soil. Slowly, impossibly, a tiny green leaf began to unfurl from a dead-looking stem. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. It was an act of nurturing, of hope, in a place that had none. Another time, I cut my hand badly while chopping wood. I'm clumsy with an axe, always have been. My anger gets the better of me sometimes, and I swing too hard too fast. I came back into the cabin, bleeding everywhere, cursing under my breath. I was about to just wrap it in a dirty rag, and douse it with whiskey, my usual method. But she was there. She rose from her corner, and for the first time, she moved toward me with purpose. She took my hand gently, her touch surprisingly firm. She led me to the basin, washed the wound with a clean cloth and warm water, and then from a small pouch I'd never seen before, she produced a salve of crushed leaves and pine resin. It smelled of the forest. She applied it to the cut, and wrapped it neatly with a strip of clean linen from one of her own ragged garments. She did all of this without a single sound, her face still hidden by the hood. When she was done, she simply retreated back to her corner. The wound healed faster than any cut I'd ever had. These moments began to unravel me. I was a man of simple transactions. You work, you eat, you hunt, you survive. But this wasn't a transaction. This was care. It was a language I had long forgotten. I found myself watching her, not as a keeper watches a prisoner, but as a man watches a mystery unfold. I started talking to her, not to her, exactly, more at her. I'd be cleaning my rifle, and just start speaking into the silence, telling her about the habits of the elk, the way the wind sounds before a big snow. I told her stories about the mountain, about my failures as a trapper, about the time I almost froze to death, chasing a buck. I was really just talking to myself, trying to fill the oppressive quiet. But she would listen. Her hooded form would be still,
and I knew she was taking in every word. The hollow space inside me began to change. It was still there, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with her presence, with the scent of her pine resin salve, with the sight of that single green leaf on the geranium. I was becoming dangerously attached to the shadow I'd bought for $3. I started to feel a raw protective instinct. The thought of those men in the settlement, of that greasy bearded man, would fill me with a cold rage I hadn't felt in years. I had brought her here to serve me, to ease my loneliness. But the truth was, I had no control over her at all. She was slowly, silently, taming me. Now I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? To be trapped by a blizzard with a complete mystery, a person you feel responsible for but know nothing about. Have you ever been through something similar? A situation that completely upended the world you knew? Comment below. The blizzard hit without warning. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind began to howl like a chorus of damned souls. Snow came down, not in flakes, but in a solid, blinding white wall. Within hours, the cabin was a ship in a sea of white, the windows completely covered, the door blocked by a drift that was taller than me. We were trapped. The wind shrieked through the tiny cracks in the log walls, and the entire cabin groaned under the weight of the snow piling up on the roof. It was the kind of storm that could kill you, that could bury you alive, and no one would find you until the spring thaw. The fire became our whole world, a tiny bubble of warmth and light against the roaring darkness. For 2 days and 2 nights, the storm raged, and we tended the fire together, a silent, coordinated team. It was in the heart of that storm, with the world trying to tear its way inside, that everything was about to change. The past I had buried under 15 years of snow was about to be dug up.
The third night of the blizzard was the worst. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. It felt personal, like something ancient and angry was trying to claw its way into the cabin. Every time I added a log to the fire, the brief opening of the stove door would suck the warmth out of the room, replacing it with a lung-seizing cold. We were huddled close to the hearth, she on her side, me on mine. The small space felt even smaller, charged with the storm outside, and the unspoken tension within. My mind, frayed from lack of sleep, and the constant roar of the wind, started to drift. The ghosts I'd kept at bay for so long began to whisper in the gale. I saw faces in the dancing flames, my father's disapproving scowl, the friends I'd abandoned, and her, Lily. Her face was the clearest of all. Her smile, the way her eyes would crinkle at the corners. The memory was so vivid, so painful, it was like a physical blow. I had come to this mountain to forget that face, and now, in the heart of this storm, it was all I could see. I glanced over at the hooded woman beside me. Her form was just a silhouette against the firelight. This silent, unknown person, who had brought life back to a dead plant, and tended my wounds without a word. In my exhausted, grief-stricken state, the lines began to blur. The silence from her felt like the silence from the grave. The mystery of her felt like the unanswered questions that haunted me about Lily's death. You know, I slurred, my voice thick with whiskey and sorrow. You're just like her. So quiet. You just watch. She used to do that. Watch me work. Never said much. Didn't have to. I was talking to the ghost, not the woman. But the woman shifted. It was a small movement, but in the stillness of our shared space, it was like a gunshot. Her head tilted, that familiar, listening gesture. I pressed on, the dam inside me finally breaking. I should have been there. I was angry, over something so stupid, a broken promise. I left. I just walked out. By the time I came back, I choked on the words, the guilt a physical stone in my throat. By the time I came back, she was gone. A fever, they said, took her in a day. I never even got to say goodbye. Never got to say I was sorry. The cabin was silent, for a moment, save for the shrieking wind. I felt a tear freeze on my cheek. I hadn't cried in 15 years. I wiped it away angrily. What am I even doing? Talking to you. You're just a shadow. I took a shaky breath, trying to regain my composure. I tried to push the memories back down, to rebuild the wall, to make her a thing again, not a person, not a confessor. Shadow, I said, my voice cold and hard, trying to re-establish the old distance. Put another log on the fire, She didn't move. For a second I thought she was asleep, or just ignoring me. Then a sound emerged from the darkness of her hood. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. It wasn't a word. It was a laugh, a short, sharp, bitter little sound. It was more shocking than the loudest clap of thunder. My head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" She shifted again, turning her body slightly toward me. The firelight caught the edge of her hood, but her face remained in darkness. Then she spoke. Her voice, when it finally came, was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't frail or broken. It was low, raspy from disuse, but clear, and it was filled with a chilling, heartbreaking irony. "My name," she said, each word a carefully placed stone, "is not Shadow." She paused, and in that pause the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The wind outside died down for a single eerie moment. "My name is Alara," she said. Then she delivered the final blow, the words that shattered my universe. Lily was my older sister. The air left my lungs. The floor seemed to fall away beneath me. Ilara. Lily had talked about her younger sister, Ilara. The wild one. The one who was always running off. The one Lily worried about constantly. The name echoed in the chambers of my memory. A forgotten key, turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 15 years. I stared at the hooded figure, but I wasn't seeing a stranger anymore. I was seeing the ghost of my past, given flesh and bone, and a voice that had just condemned me. The strength went out of my legs. I slid from the stool I was on, landing hard on my knees on the rough-hewn floorboards. The sound of my own ragged breathing filled the sudden quiet. I wasn't a mountain man. I wasn't a hermit. I was just a coward, hiding from his sins. And my sin had just walked into my house, bought for $3 miserable. The woman I had purchased to silence my loneliness was the one person in the world who could give voice to my damnation. The storm broke with the dawn. Sunlight, pale and watery, filtered through the snow-caked windows, illuminating a world made clean and new. But inside the cabin, the storm had just begun. I was still on the floor, the cold of the wood seeping into my bones. Ilara hadn't moved from her spot by the fire. The hood was still up. The silence was back, but it was different now. It wasn't empty or mysterious. It was heavy with everything that had just been said, and everything that hadn't. "How?" The word was a croak, torn from my throat. "How did you end up there?" She was quiet for a long time. I thought maybe she wouldn't speak again, that those few devastating words were all I would ever get. Then she began to talk, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the ruin she had made of me. "After Lily died," she began, "everything fell apart. Our parents blamed you, of course, for leaving, for breaking her heart. They said the sadness is what made her sick, but they blamed me too, for not being more like her, for not being the daughter they could be proud of." She spoke of a home that became a house of ghosts, of parents consumed by grief, who had no love left for their remaining child. She ran away at 17, a year after Lily's death. She drifted, working odd jobs, falling in with the wrong people, always moving, trying to outrun the same shadows I was. Years passed. Life wore her down, stripped her of her fight, her hope. She ended up with a man who was charming at first, and cruel later. He was the one who took everything she had, who left her in that settlement, offered up like a piece of meat. "I never looked for you," she said, her voice devoid of accusation, which was somehow worse. "I never even thought about you. You were just a ghost from a story my sister used to tell, a bad memory. When that man dragged me to that market, I was empty. I didn't care what happened. Then I saw you. I knew you instantly. Even after all these years. You have the same haunted look in your eyes. The same one Lily described in her letters." The mention of letters was another blow. Lily had written to her about me. What had she said? Had she told Alara about our dreams, or about our fights? "When you bought me," she continued, a bitter edge to her voice now. "It was the cruelest joke the universe could play. I came here, to your prison on this mountain, and I watched you. I wanted to hate you. I tried, but I saw a man just as broken as I was. A man talking to ghosts." Finally, she reached up with one hand, and slowly, deliberately, pulled back the hood. My breath hitched.
It was like looking at a distorted echo of the past. She had Lily's high cheekbones, and the same stubborn set of her jaw, but her eyes were entirely her own. They were a deep, stormy grey, filled not with the gentle warmth I remembered in Lily's, but with a fierce, painful wisdom. They were the eyes of a survivor, and they were looking right through me. Her face was thin, etched with hardship, but she was beautiful, not in the soft way Lily had been, but in a way that was sharp, and strong, and utterly captivating. Now it was my turn. The truth was a stone I'd been carrying for 15 years, and it was time to put it down, no matter who it crushed. It wasn't a fever, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's what I let everyone believe, what I tried to believe. I told her everything, about the fight. It was over something so small, so insignificant. I wanted to move west, to chase a foolish dream of gold. She wanted to stay, to build a life where her family was. I called her a coward, afraid of living. She called me a child, chasing fantasies. I stormed out. I was gone for 2 days, drinking my anger away in a town 50 miles down the road. When my head cleared, and the guilt set in, I rushed back, but I was too late. It wasn't a fever. She had gone looking for me, caught in a sudden, unseasonable freezing rainstorm down by the river. She fell, hit her head. By the time they found her, it was too late. She died of exposure, alone, calling my name. Telling the story out loud, to her sister, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The words tore me open, leaving me raw and exposed. When I was finished, a profound silence filled the room. Alara just stared at me, her grey eyes unreadable. I expected rage, hatred, a scream of condemnation. I deserved it.
But what I got was silence. She stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the snow-covered landscape. Her back was to me. All these years, she said softly, more to the window than to me. All these years. I thought she died, because she was sad. They let me believe she just gave up. She turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw tears tracking paths down her dusty cheeks. It's worse, but at least it's real. There was no forgiveness in her voice, but there wasn't damnation either. There was just a vast shared emptiness. The loss of a woman we had both loved in our own flawed ways. A woman whose memory had defined both of our miserable lives. I didn't buy a woman for $3. I didn't find a servant, or a shadow. Fate, or whatever you want to call it, had led Lily's sister to my door, not for revenge, not for punishment, but for the truth, and maybe, just maybe, for something else. The days that followed were quiet, but the silence had changed again. It was no longer a wall between us. It was a space to think, a space to grieve. We didn't talk about the past again. We didn't have to. It was there, sitting between us, a known entity now, not a ghost. We fell into a new routine. We worked together, chopping wood, checking the trap lines, tending the fire. I taught her how to track, and she taught me the names of the wild herbs she gathered. One afternoon, we were sitting at the table, sharing a meal in silence. She looked at the geranium on the windowsill, which now had 3 new green leaves. She always loved flowers. Alara said quietly. I know, I replied. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a happy ending. I was still a man with a hole in his soul, and she was still a woman piecing her life back together. But we weren't alone in the silence anymore. We were 2 broken people on a lonely mountain, brought together by a ghost. And for the first time in 15 years, the future didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a trail, disappearing into the woods, and I wasn't sure, but I thought maybe, just maybe, we were going to walk it together.